Ever get that feeling? Like
Yeah.
you're trying to level up in life.
Yeah.
Maybe at work or even with relationships.
Hmm.
You try making these little changes here and there, but the big breakthrough, it just never seems to come.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
It's like you're stuck with an old map trying to find a new destination.
It's like refolding the same map over and over again,
Yeah.
expecting it to lead you somewhere different.
Exactly. And, we've all been there. We want to actually make progress, a significant leap forward.
Yeah.
So today, we're doing a deep dive into a book that's helped a ton of people find a new map for that kind of transformation. Stephen Covey's The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People.
And for those listening who really want to get to the heart of things quickly and effectively, that's exactly what we're going to do. We've pulled out the most important principles from Covey's work, the ones that really help people become more effective in the long run.
Right, so you can get the key insights without getting lost in all the details.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like a crash course in a really influential framework for both personal and professional growth.
That's a great way to put it.
Now, Covey isn't about just throwing out quick tips or making small surface-level changes.
No, not at all.
He's talking about something much deeper. A paradigm shift.
Yeah, like really changing the way we see things, the lenses we use to view the world.
And he argues that's where real lasting change comes from. So today, we're going to explore how we can go beyond just tinkering with our actions
Mm-hmm.
and really shift those underlying paradigms to create truly meaningful and lasting improvements in our lives. So let's start with this idea of paradigms. What exactly are we talking about here?
Well, at its core, a paradigm is basically just how we see the world around us. It's our mental model of not only what is, like the actual reality we experience, but also what should be.
Right, like our values and beliefs.
Exactly. And the interesting thing is how much we interpret our experiences through these models. We're often not even aware they're there.
Yeah, it's like they're invisible filters.
Right. And we tend to just assume our view is the objective truth, like that's just the way things are.
We don't even question it.
Nope. But Covey has this great quote. We see the world not as it is, but as we are, or as we are conditioned to see it.
That's so true. I mean, it really makes you think about all those unconscious assumptions we're carrying around with us.
It really does.
And Covey suggests that all of our outward behaviors, even our attitudes, they all stem from these fundamental paradigms.
They do. It's like trying to improve your tennis serve by just focusing on hitting the ball harder. If you don't have the right form to begin with, you're not going to get very far.
Right, you're just going to keep making the same mistakes.
Exactly. And Covey uses this great analogy. He says technique is like cramming for school. You might pass the test, but you haven't really learned anything.
You're just memorizing facts without really understanding the concepts.
Exactly. So if we try to change our behaviors and attitudes without addressing the underlying paradigm, it's usually just a temporary fix.
A Band-Aid solution.
For the kind of significant change that Covey calls quantum change, we need to dig deeper and question those basic assumptions. It's like the difference between treating the symptoms of an illness and actually addressing the root cause.
That's a good analogy.
And this ties in directly with our character. Covey says, being is seeing in the human dimension, and what we see is highly interrelated to what we are. So what we see is shaped by who we are on the inside.
It's all connected.
It is.
So this paradigm shift is like the key to unlocking that deeper level of change, right? And it can happen suddenly, like a sudden realization, or it can be a more gradual process.
Yeah, like slowly reevaluating your beliefs over time.
But it's that shift in perspective that really allows for real growth. Now, Covey also talks about the difference between practices and principles.
Yes, he does.
Can you explain what that means and why it's important?
Sure. So practices are the specific actions we take, the techniques we use in certain situations, and those are often very context-specific. But principles are the fundamental universal truths that apply in almost every situation. Things like integrity and honesty, those are valuable in pretty much any human interaction. And Covey argues that our values are like our personal maps, but correct principles represent the territory, the actual way the world works.
So when our values are aligned with those principles, our maps are more accurate.
Exactly. And we can navigate life more effectively.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So blindly following a popular practice without understanding the principle behind it might not actually get you where you want to go.
Right. You might get lucky sometimes, but it's not a reliable path to success.
It's like trying to follow a complicated recipe without understanding the basic techniques of cooking.
Yeah.
And this leads us to another powerful idea that Covey presents. The way we see the problem is the problem.
It's a bit of a mind bender, isn't it?
It is.
Einstein said something similar. The significant problems we face cannot be solved at the same level of thinking we were at when we created them. So if we're stuck in a particular paradigm, we're going to keep approaching problems with the same flawed perspective, and that means we're going to keep getting the same
We're
results.
perpetuating the problem.
Exactly. But a paradigm shift allows us to see the problem from a completely different angle, and that can open up whole new possibilities for solutions.
Okay, so we're starting to see how influential our paradigms are, these fundamental ways of seeing the world. But how do we actually go about changing them? How do we create lasting positive change in our lives? And that's where habits come in, right?
Exactly. Covey defines a habit as the intersection of three things: knowledge, skill, and desire.
Okay, break those down for us.
Sure. So, knowledge is the theoretical understanding of what to do and why it's important. Skill is the practical ability to actually do it. And desire is the motivation, the want to, that drives us to do it consistently.
So you need all three to form a true habit.
Exactly. You might know what you should do and even how to do it, but if you don't really want to do it, it's probably not going to become a habit.
Right, and you might really want to do something, but if you don't have the knowledge or skills, you're going to struggle.
Exactly.
So it's this combination of knowing, doing, and wanting that creates a truly ingrained habit.
Now, Covey talks about developing effective habits, which then leads to the principle that private victories precede public victories.
Yeah, that one can be a little counterintuitive.
It does sound a bit backwards. Can you explain what he means by that?
Sure. What Covey's saying is that we need to work on ourselves first. We need to develop our character, our internal strength, our self-discipline
Before we can really achieve anything externally.
before we can build strong relationships or find success in the world around us. It's about mastering ourselves first, building that inner foundation of effectiveness.
And this idea connects directly with the PPC balance, right?
It does.
The balance between production and production capability.
Yeah. So let's unpack that a little bit. P stands for production. Basically, getting the results we want, achieving our goals. Covey calls them the golden eggs.
Right.
And then PC is production capability, which is the goose that lays those golden eggs. It's our assets, our resources, our ability to continue producing those results over time.
Exactly. And true effectiveness lies in finding and maintaining that balance between the two.
So if we're just focused on producing those golden eggs, achieving those immediate outcomes, and we neglect the goose, we're eventually going to run into trouble.
Absolutely. If we sacrifice our health, damage relationships, or don't keep learning and growing, eventually the goose is going to get sick and stop laying eggs altogether.
And on the other hand, if we just focus on taking care of the goose without ever expecting any eggs, we're not going to get anywhere either.
Nope, you need both.
It's about long-term sustainability. Now, the very first of Covey's 7 habits is be proactive. And it seems like this is the foundation for all the other habits.
Absolutely.
So what does it really mean to be proactive?
Being proactive means taking responsibility for our lives, for our choices. Covey contrasts this with being reactive, where people feel controlled by their emotions, their moods, and external circumstances.
Reactive people tend to blame outside forces for their problems.
Right. They don't feel like they have much control over their own lives.
And Covey talks about these social maps of determinism that a lot of people unconsciously operate under. Can you give us a brief overview of those?
Sure. He identifies 3 main ones: genetic determinism, which is the belief that our genes determine who we are. Then there's psychic determinism, which says our upbringing and past experiences control us.
So we're basically products of our past.
Right. And then there's environmental determinism, which blames our current circumstances for a situation,
So everything is out of our control.
basically. But Covey argues that while these factors do have an influence, we still have the freedom to choose our response. We have the power to choose how we react to what happens to us.
And he uses Viktor Frankl as an example of that.
Yeah, Frankl was a Holocaust survivor who found that even in the most horrific circumstances, he still had the freedom to choose his attitude.
Which is incredible.
It really is. Frankl identified 3 central values in life: the experiential, which is what we experience; the creative, which is what we create; and the attitudinal, which is our response to suffering.
And Covey focuses on that attitudinal value, our ability to choose how we respond to whatever life throws at us.
Exactly. And this leads us to the concept of the circle of influence versus the circle of concern. Our circle of concern includes all the things we care about but have no control over. things like global events or the actions of other people.
Yeah.
Our circle of influence, on the other hand, contains the things we can actually do something about. Our own behavior, our choices, our attitudes, maybe even our skills and knowledge.
So we should focus our energy on the things we can control.
Exactly. Proactive people focus on their circle of influence. They take initiative, and as a result, their circle of influence grows over time. Reactive people, on the other hand, they focus on their circle of concern, they complain and blame, and their circle of influence actually shrinks. Covey also breaks down problems into three categories: direct control, which are problems with our own behavior;
Okay.
indirect control, which are problems with other people's behavior; and no control, which are problems we can't do anything about. So proactive people take responsibility for the first, they try to influence the second, and they learn to accept the third.
That's a really helpful framework.
It is.
So the second habit is begin with the end in mind. And this is all about having a clear vision of what we want to achieve, right? It's about mental creation before physical creation.
Absolutely. Covey says everything is created twice, first in the mind and then in the real world. He uses the example of building a house. You first have blueprints and a vision before you start laying bricks. And he says we should apply this principle to everything in our lives.
So we should define our goals, clarify our values, and visualize our ideal future.
Exactly. And in this context, he makes a distinction between management and leadership. Management is about doing things right, being efficient. But leadership is about doing the right things, making sure we're on the right track.
So it's like climbing a ladder. Management helps us climb quickly, but leadership makes sure we're climbing the right ladder.
Exactly. And Covey points out that we humans have two unique gifts: imagination and conscience. Imagination allows us to envision things that don't yet exist, and conscience is our inner moral compass, guiding us towards what's right. And these two gifts are what allow us to be proactive and exercise personal leadership.
And that's where the idea of a personal mission statement comes in.
It does.
Okay.
A personal mission statement is a written declaration of our values and purpose in life.
So it's like a guiding star for our actions.
Exactly. And Covey also talks about the power of affirmations in solidifying this mental creation.
But it's not just about repeating any positive phrase, is it?
No. There are certain elements that make an affirmation truly effective. It should be personal, positive, in the present tense, visual, and emotional. He gives an example related to parenting. Instead of saying something general like, "my children will behave," a more effective affirmation would be, "I feel calm and patient, responding with wisdom and love when my children misbehave." It's more specific, positive, and it evokes a feeling.
Okay, so we've mentally created our desired outcomes. Now, the third habit is put first things first. And this is where we move from vision to execution to managing our time and priorities.
Exactly. And Covey says the real challenge isn't time management, it's self-management. We all have the same 24 hours in a day. It's about choosing how we spend those hours.
Making sure we're focusing on the most important things.
Right. He also talks about how we should approach people differently than we approach tasks. With tasks, we want to be efficient, get them done quickly and well. But with people, we want to be effective. We want to build relationships, even if it takes more time.
And he suggests that inner peace comes from living in harmony with principles and our own values.
Absolutely.
Okay, so let's recap some of the key ideas we've talked about today.
Right.
We started by understanding the power of paradigms, those lenses through which we view the world, and how shifting our paradigms can lead to major personal and professional growth. Then we looked at how habits are formed. Knowledge, skill, and desire all have to be there. And we talked about the principle that we have to work on ourselves before we can effectively work with others.
Right.
Then we discussed the PPC balance, the need to nurture our ability to produce results, not just focus on the results themselves. We talked about the importance of being proactive, taking responsibility for our choices, and focusing on what we can control. And then we explored the habit of begin with the end in mind, mentally creating our desired outcomes, and using our imagination and conscience to guide our actions. And finally, we touched on put first things first, managing ourselves effectively and aligning our actions with our values and priorities.
That's a great summary.
Thanks. So for you, our listeners, the takeaway is this. Real growth doesn't come from chasing fads or using superficial techniques. It comes from understanding and potentially changing your paradigms.
It's about really looking at how you see yourself and the world and asking if there's a better way to see things.
And as Covey says, we have the freedom to choose our response to what happens to us.
We can focus on our circle of influence, align our actions with our values, and create lasting positive change.
So as you think about what we've talked about today, I'm going to leave you with a question. What's one belief you have about yourself or the world that, if you were willing to shift it, could unlock significant positive change in your life? Take some time to reflect on that. It might just be the first step on your own journey toward greater effectiveness.
And maybe it will inspire you to dive deeper into Covey's work. There's a lot of wisdom there.
There is. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, everyone. We'll see you next time.